What's up, everybody? Welcome to the new show, Worst Favorite Record. We've got Dylan Sevey with us today. Thanks for doing this. Thanks for being the guinea pig to see if this idea actually works. How you doing?
Thanks. I'm good. This is great for me for multiple reasons. Mostly because you and I talk on Facebook Messenger from time to time, but doing this, you can't just hide as soon as I say something annoying or disagreeable,
Yeah.
which both of those will happen. So that makes me excited. But y'all know this is my favorite channel. This is an honor and a pleasure for me to be your guinea pig.
So the whole idea behind this new series, podcast, episode, whatever it ends up being, is that I'm going to bring people on to have them talk about records that they love that are not generally considered to be very good. And so I kind of think of a couple different categories for this topic. I think you can have a record that you see the badness in, you understand why people don't like it, but you just enjoy it, you get some fun out of it or something, and you look past the flaws that are there. Someone could also come onto this show with a record that they legitimately have no idea why people don't like it. They just love it completely, wholeheartedly, and it's baffling to them, its reputation. So those are kind of like the two big overarching things. I think you could also do a record maybe that is just kind of bad in comparison to the rest of an artist's catalog. Like if your favorite Dylan record is Down in the Groove or something like that, I think that would be another kind of record someone could bring onto the show. But before revealing what we're actually talking about, which category of record is this for you?
Well, first I want to go on record as saying that Down in the Groove is only the fifth worst Dylan record. There are four worse than it, but that's another conversation for another time. Um, for me, I am going to be talking about an album today that I like. I wouldn't say that I love it, and I don't think that I could make a case for it as an extremely well-made album, but I do like it. And I think there's a reputation that it has, especially within the fan community of the group, that it doesn't totally deserve. So I'm not going full hot take on it, but it's not as bad as most people think it is.
All right, so without further ado, which album are you here to defend today?
I am here today to defend the third album in a trilogy of albums released by Green Day in the year 2012. Those albums are called Uno, Dos, and the album I'm talking about, Trey, which is, for those of you who are familiar with Green Day, very cleverly named after their drummer, Trey Cool.
I was looking on Rate Your Music this morning to get some takes from there from people. It has a 1.88 rating out of 5 stars on Rate Your Music. And someone left the review, can't believe they wrote 3 shit albums just to make a Trey Cool joke.
Yeah, it's maybe in the comments, maybe people can discuss the bigger crime to humanity, the name of this album, or the intro to Vertigo by U2 with the misuse of the Spanish counting system. That said, 1.88 out of 5 is ridiculous. However, Green Day did this album a favor by releasing an album in 2020 that is so undeniably worse, with an even worse album title, Father of All Motherfuckers, that I've yet to meet a self-respecting Green Day fan who can properly defend it. And there is exactly one good song on it. So, but they did Trey and this trilogy a favor with that, but we'll get into that a little later.
Yeah, I was going to bring that up. So this is, I think most people would say this is not the worst Green Day record. And I found it interesting kind of looking into these records a bit and looking at reviews and stuff. People seem to be really split on this trilogy as to like which one's the worst. Like I saw people saying both that this was the worst and that it was the best. And I saw quite a few people say it was at least it's better than Dose. So I think the entire trilogy is not looked upon entirely favorably.
No, that's very much one of the main reasons why I wanted to talk about this album. There are kind of three main reasons I wanted to talk about it. One um, is I really want to argue in defense of Green Day in general. Secondly, I know you don't like Green Day based off of comments you've made on the channel. I know that Cram has defended 21st Century Breakdown. I'm not sure how he feels about anything else. Joe, I think, nominated Jesus of Suburbia for Song of the Year in '04. Outside of that, I'm sure he has very much a man of the people mentality that he likes them. Um, but I wanted to defend him. But thirdly, yes, when talking about the trilogy, so basically, I don't know if you read into this, but for anyone who doesn't know, uh, these three albums were released in the year 2012. I believe they were originally meant to be released in somewhat longer increments in between each other, like one near the beginning of the year, one in the middle, one at the end. But earlier in the year, Billy Joe Armstrong suffered a pretty public mental breakdown at the iHeart Music Festival, where there was miscommunication about the amount of time that they had to play, and it was communicated to him they had to cut their set short, and he went on a profanity-laced rant about how he's not fucking Justin Bieber and all this stuff, and um, then he eventually entered rehab. I believe he was suffering from multiple addictions, I think mostly painkillers. Anyway, that pushed back a lot of the stuff, and they all ended up being released in the span of like 3 or 4 months. I think Uno was released in September, Dose in November, Train December. And the two albums that preceded the trilogy, American Idiot in '04 and 21st Century Breakdown in '09, both pretty well known. American Idiot, obviously, far more well known, far more revered. Both, rock opera formats, very much expanding on the sound that they were previously known for, expanding their songwriting, their sonic palette, if you will. And 21st Century Breakdown, I think this is a pretty commonly held opinion that I agree with. 21st Century Breakdown is very much a case of let's try to do what we did before a little differently, but not as good and not very successfully, which I think there are select songs on that record that are very, very strong and very good. But for multiple reasons, I don't think it holds a candle to what came before it. And the response to it, I think, certainly pushed them in the direction of, okay, we need to switch things up. And there's definitely a focus over these three records of, back to basics, if you will, less bombastic soundscapes, much more succinct songwriting. But, you've now done these two huge undertakings with these two rock operas. You can't just say, all right, well, now we're going to make a normal, regular thing again. There has to be some sort of, I don't want to call it a gimmick, but, some sort of, marketing thing that'll get people interested. So, hey, we got all of these songs, and there's a loose quote unquote theme throughout them. I believe it's supposed to be that Uno or like the songs before the party, Dose are the songs while you're at the party, and Trey is the songs after the party. But for the most part, they're all much, much simpler songs. And the argument that you made, why make three shit albums just to make a Trey pun? It's definitely, if you listen to all three albums, as I'm sure you just devoured all three of them.
Oh yeah.
I think that even the most hardcore Green Day fans and Green Day defenders would listen to all three and say, yeah, you could have made a decent single record here. it's very much, I think, a Ryan Adams case of, hey, just because you have all the songs doesn't mean you need to release every single one of them. So that's the basic, I think, sort of reputation and setup to these albums and their existence and their
Yeah.
being.
So as you said, and I got the impression that like they had gotten too big, maybe like conceptually, even not just popularity wise, but
Mm-hmm.
like they had gone into that rock opera territory. And you can tell even just from the album artwork that these are supposed to be like their fun records. They're getting back to like having fun again. As far as like each record having a distinct personality, I would say barely. Like I checked out some of the stuff on the other records, and it's, man, it all sounds pretty darn similar. There's a lot more f bombs on Uno, on almost like every song. He's dropping tons, and not quite as many on Trey.
Well,
But
yeah,
other than
there's
that,
probably more on a per song average on Uno, but don't forget that Dose literally has a song called "Fuck Time" on it, which one of the nadirs of their catalog. Yeah, it's it's certainly one of those things. I'll go into my heartfelt, outright defense of Green Day in general maybe a little later, but regardless of how anyone feels about American Idiot in terms of how they enjoy it from a sonic perspective, or if it's something you like in terms of your own taste or genre or anything, it is such a well composed and well written album that I think deserved the praise that it got. Whereas 21st Century Breakdown, when you read the lyrics to a lot of those songs, it's like you said, getting too big for themselves conceptually. It's sort of like, man, I see what you're trying to do here. And you see a little bit of this too on Trey, which I know I'm here to defend, but I mean, to me, there's are still some very not good songs on this. And to me, the absolute worst offender is the song Dirty Rotten Bastards, which very much falls apart multiple times. And it kind of has the 21st Century Breakdown effect where it starts off doing one thing, and then halfway through the song, he's all of a sudden trying to form a narrative that not only didn't exist in the first part of the song, but nowhere else previously on the record. And so it's like, what are you attempting to do here? It's almost like, was this song written previously for another album that he then tried to update here? I don't really know, but that happens multiple times on 21st Century Breakdown, where unlike American Idiot, which is a very cohesive set of songs, the story is very easy to follow. It's very well crafted. Um, they very much veered a little off that with 21st Century Breakdown. And then, yeah, like you said, I can understand the concept of those three records trying to be before, during, and after the party, but just barely. They formed a side project called Foxborough Hot Tubs that put out a record in between American Idiot and 21st Century Breakdown, which I think is a super fun record. It's very like 50s rock and roll influence, early 60s. It's a blast, and there's a lot of songs on Dose that kind of have a Foxborough Hot Tubs feel. I think some of the songs were even initially performed by them or written for them. And so I think you can kind of see conceptually where that comes into play. Like that for them is their fun sort of thing. Like we're at the party, we're playing this super fun music. This is what we really enjoy. And you hear that in some of those songs. And in Trey, there's a lot more melancholic and yearning sort of themes. So, I can understand that you come home, you're coming down a little bit, but sonically, there's there's some more acoustic instruments on Trey, and other than that, it's not very different at all.
so let's take it back a little further. You talked about American Idiot in 21st Century Breakdown. But prior to that, like, what was your experience with Green Day? Like, are you a longtime fan? Do you go back to Dookie? Do you like, what were your expectations going into the trio of records, and like how much were you looking forward to them?
I know it may be hard to believe for viewers as well as yourself because I am so wise and I give off such a um, almost educational sort of vibe. But I am younger than you, and I know it seems like I'm decades older. But I'm a '91 baby, so I was a little too young. Dookie came out in '94, but throughout my childhood, you hear songs on the radio, and I enjoyed them just fine. It was American Idiot that really, I think, uh, got me a lot more exposed to them, and then subsequently made me go back. But as I went back to them, I I really did fall in love with a lot of that stuff, and I guess the way that I look at it in general, like it comes down to how you view them and where your other tastes lie. I think because they've always been marketed as a punk band to some degree, whether that's pop punk, just straight up punk rock or whatever, that's always going to play a part in how people think about Green Day, depending on their biases for or against the genre. Uh, there's a lot of punk music I like. I've always dug the forefathers of the genre, Stooges, Ramones, Clash, Sex Pistols, some of the underground stuff from the 80s, Minor Threat, Dead Kennedys, Misfits, so on and so forth. It's never been my favorite genre of music. It's not a genre of music that I go back to a lot. And I wouldn't say I'm uneducated on it, but I wouldn't call myself an aficionado, but I have a healthy respect for it. And there's a lot of punk that I like, and there's some that I really love. When it comes to bands like Green Day, or at least the bands they've gotten loved in with, I've never been a fan of any of them. So in some ways, it almost doesn't make sense why I'm as big of a Green Day fan as I am. At no point, even when I was younger, I've never been a Blink 182 fan, even though I just helped my friend Katie Tupin record some reimagined versions of some of their songs. I never got too into NoFX. There's select songs I like by The Offspring, but I don't think I could ever listen to a whole album of theirs, and I wouldn't call myself a fan. And then the slew of bands that have come along in their wake. This is Fiona, by the way. The slew of bands that came along in their wake. Newfound Glory, Simple Plan in the early 2000s, and then eventually getting into Fall Out Boy and R.I.P. Panic at the Disco. I've never had any use for those bands. I've never taken any enjoyment out of those bands. With all due respect to Joe's Fall Out Boy Album of the Year winner, the absolute closest to any of it that I really liked All Killer No Filler by Sum 41 when I was 10, and I think I still remember all the words to Fat Lip. But other than that, it's kind of like Pearl Jam in the sense that I adore Pearl Jam, but I despise 99% of the music that they've influenced. But what sets Green Day apart in my mind, and both when I initially became a fan of theirs, went back and thinking on it now years later, is that despite the obvious punk influences in their playing and their presentation, they're just a solid rock and roll band. All three of them are great players, especially Trey Cool, the drummer, and they play really well together. In terms of their songwriting, the only difference between them and a lot of renowned rock or power pop bands is the punk stylings or presentation. If you presented a lot of their material, even just slightly differently, I think that a lot of people who outright dismiss them based on their reputation or lazy cursory listens would be amazed at the strength of Billy Joe's, not Billy Joel. We will not go there today. Billy Joe's melodic writing and a decent amount of his lyrics. I don't see how anyone can deny the strength of songs like Redundant or She, When I Come Around, Scattered. So many excellent compositions across their first few albums. including the extremely underrated Warning album that came out in 2000, which I will put $10 down that if you ever do their listography, that will be your number one or number two. And yeah, and I don't care if people got sick of the singles from American Idiot or if they absurdly tried to categorize it as an emo album, because it is such a triumph on so many levels. And, you know, I don't know, to people who know me and know my taste in music, it probably sounds funny, but they're legitimately one of my most listened to bands ever. And I think that's just a big aspect of it. It's listenability. I mean, when I think of great melodic songwriting, Paul McCartney, Brian Wilson, Tom Petty, like people who are known for crafting incredible melodies, I don't see what really sets Billy Joe apart from, like, his melodies are and have always been unbelievably strong. I don't see how anyone could doubt that. So that's where I stand on them. That's where I've always stood on them. I would love to hear where your distaste of them comes from.
I think a lot of it comes from how much praise American Idiot got, because I was lukewarm on them to begin with, and then for that to be seen as like such a big record and so important, I did not see it. I thought, like, these just sound like big radio songs, and production is boring and bland.
Yeah, Jesus of Suburbia, a 9-minute multi-part. Yeah, very much just a big normal. Dude, listen, I don't know if you heard. It was your last year, a couple years ago, and Tenacious D did their like medley of songs from Tommy.
I think I saw that it happened. I don't think I actually watched it.
Yeah, listen, I'm not gonna say that American Idiot is as good as Tommy, especially because I know that Cram is watching this and that's like his second favorite album or whatever. But listen to Tenacious D play those songs in that way, like, to me, it just hammered home the long held belief I had that, like, there's really not much of a difference between the only difference is, the production stylings, which, you put a lot of stock into production, and that's fair. I tend to as well. It kind of depends on the band or the style or whatever it is. I mean, I think that production is what it should be. But I think if The Who made a record like Tommy in the year 2004, same songwriting and everything, if the production was the only thing different, it wouldn't sound that much different from American Idiot. Yeah, they sound like big radio rock songs, but firstly, there's nothing wrong with a good, catchy rock song. And secondly, like, reading the lyrics to them, the lyrics to those songs are so much smarter that, and look, I like Foo Fighters, but they're so much smarter than anything that's put out there. And they're so much smarter than anything else coming out at that time. And any of those bands that I just mentioned before, name anything that they've ever done, like Jesus of Suburbia, or even a song like Homecoming, which is the other longer song on that record, which is a fantastic multi-suite song with great melodies, great lyric. And look, we're about to talk about some really bad lyrics on Trey. But to me, he's like McCartney. When he focuses and tries to write good lyrics, he's as good as anyone. And when he doesn't, he sucks. So I don't know. I understand not wanting to, or not understanding the hype, not wanting to give into the hype, but I don't know. I don't know how you can just look at American Idiot and say these are just big dumb rock songs. I think it's so much more than that.
Well, if you take Tommy and you put the production of American Idiot on it, how much worse is Tommy? And I think the answer to that is a lot.
Sure. And listen, I'm certainly not going to sit here and say that production doesn't mean nothing. And some of it is so much of it, the reason that we have any of these discussions, the reason that this entire channel exists is the beauty of subjectivity. I watched an hour and a half video of you guys trying to proclaim there was anything remotely acceptable about the existence of Def Leppard. And I listened to you talk about how Mutt Lange made these amazing sounding records when that is the worst music I've ever heard in my life. It's the worst sounding music. It's the worst produced music. It's the worst written music. It's the worst. Everything about it is so bad to me. So I don't even think the production of American Idiot is necessarily amazing. I don't think it's terrible. I think the production on 21st Century Breakdown is a lot worse, and the production on the album we're about to talk about isn't very good. But I don't think Tommy is a much worse album because Pinball Wizard is an amazing song. Christmas is an amazing song. 1921 is an amazing song. At the end of the day, like, music is meant to be listened to. So you have to consider production. You can't just throw it out the window. But I also don't think that you can just listen to American Idiot and say, yeah, it's in the middle of the Loudness Wars era, but well, these are great melodies and really good lyrics, and like it's composed effortlessly well, but I don't know, the guitars are too loud. I don't know. That's just not how I hear it personally. And I respect your opinion, but you're wrong.
Part of it also comes from just like the way they present themselves and their ideas as being like, we're going to talk about the Iraq War, and that makes us more important than every other band, which I'm all for, being political in music, and I wish more bands at that time were.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't think the fact that you did it necessarily means your record's better.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I can understand that. I suppose that I'm not going to say that those things don't matter to me to a degree, but at the end of the day, and again, it all depends on how you feel about an artist in general and what you're willing to put up with. I mean, if you're not a fan of a group or an artist, you're gonna hear things like that and see things like that and use that as a reason to not like them. There are things that, Billy Joel has done throughout his career where if Springsteen did it or if McCartney did it, I would be like, yeah, I don't have a problem with it. But because it's Billy Joel, I have a problem with it. And vice versa. So I don't know, I guess I could, but where do you stand or how do you feel about the pre-American, Dookie, Insomniac, Nimrod, Warning, all that stuff?
I don't have as much dislike for it, but it's never been like anything I cared about that much. I can hear like the stuff on Dookie is very catchy, and I understand why Dookie's huge and was huge and is still huge. I get that 100%. And then but it just wasn't for me. It never was for me. I was just like,
sure. So what for you, if you don't mind me asking, what for you is the difference between Dookie or like any of those early Green Day records and the first Weezer record?
That's a good question. I don't know. I think it's just like the personality of the band, probably mostly is what it is. Like I related a lot. Sense. I related a lot more to the kind of like nerdiness of Weezer than I did the we're punks type of thing. So I think that's probably the biggest difference.
No, I understand that. That makes sense. Because I think from a musical level, not that the albums sound exactly the same, but again, I mean, I know you're a huge power pop fan. It's, to me, when I hear songs like a lot of the ones I mentioned before, When I Come Around, She, Basket Case, any of those songs, like if you take the punk element out of it, like those melodies are just as strong as anything that Weezer was doing, anything that a lot of bands from the 70s and 80s were doing. And I think for me, that's just where I've always gravitated toward. And I love Weezer too. I wasn't saying that to knock Weezer at all, because those really the first 4 Weezer albums are really high up for me. But for me, like, I'm definitely a nerd and I'm definitely not a punk. But that's the thing. It's like when I listen to Green Day, and historically when I've listened to Green Day, I've never listened to it because I was trying to like latch on to or relate to this punk mindset or anything like that. It's just always been the melodies. And I do like a good loud guitar, and I love great drumming and fast drumming mixed with great melodies and chord progressions. So, but yeah, so that's kind of where I stand on them. I think if I sat down and made my top artists of all time list, Green Day would end up being higher than even I probably, right? They would definitely be in my top 100. They might even sneak into my top 50, which sounds insane because, again, there's no other band remotely close to Green Day that I like even a minuscule percentage as much. I also think too that Billy Joe, I really appreciate that he has never done like, especially like the newer wave of punk and emo bands, like they have that very affected accent, and I love that he's never played into that at all, and it never had like even remotely close to the whininess that Good Charlotte, Newfound Glory, Simple Plan, Blink 182 had, or Tom DeLonge at least. I think he's just a good, solid singer. And so I think that plays a role in it as well for me.
All right. So we know you're a fan. You're eagerly awaiting Uno. Uno comes out, you listen to it, and you're happy, not happy.
I think I think my initial reaction. So at the time, 2012, I'm 21 years old. When 21st Century Breakdown came out and I was 18, I remember getting it and bringing it home and going, okay, it's all right, good stuff. Again, stuff I'll still go to bat for, but uh, you know, like I said, we're already with American Idiot, we're already in that Loudness War era, and then 21st Century Breakdown is another step what I consider the wrong direction in modern production, especially the extremely clear use of Melodyne, which from American Idiot to 21st Century Breakdown, it's like maybe it was on like 1 or 2 before like the standard, and then they just cranked it up to. So Uno coming out at this point, between liking 21st Century Breakdown, not totally loving it, going to college, having life experiences, I'm not super connected to Green Day at this point, though I still really like them. And I'm working at a record store, and I normally wouldn't put on Green Day in the record store, but I buy it when it comes out. I put it on, and I think my reaction was, uh, and and then I didn't listen to it again for about 8 or 9 years. And I didn't listen to Dose or Trey when they came out because I listened to Uno, and that was enough for me. I think I just recognized that there was nothing in the way of remotely impressive songwriting. The production, it wasn't as bombastic because the material wasn't as bombastic, so that was nice, but the production left me wanting, the songs left me wanting. There were a couple melodies that I thought were okay, but that's not enough to really hold me over at the end of the day. So yeah, my reaction when it came out was one of almost total indifference, and was a big reason why, yeah, for another 8 or 9 years, I didn't listen to any Green Day other than what I already knew and liked.
Fast forward 8, 9 years, then you finally get around to giving them a shot, Dose and Trey, and something's working for you. Why are we here talking about this?
Well, all right. Well, let's not go that far. Okay, so basically, sometime during the pandemic, threw on something, American Idiot, Dookie, Nimrod, Warning, one of the records, and was really digging it. And Then I was recommended a Green Day podcast. Initially, I think they were initially called the Nimrod. I forget what they were initially called now. They've since changed the name of their podcast because they're not talking about other bands, but they were, and this is shortly after finding your channel, they were like, well, let's rank all the Green Day songs. And I've always been obsessed, strangely, with making lists and ranking things. Like, sure, why not? And then they start talking about songs that I'm not familiar with. It's like, oh, I guess I should go back and listen to these. And going back to it and listening to the trilogy hammered home some of the things that I already thought and had heard, which is that a lot of these are very undercooked, not very good songs. Maybe it was just being in the mood to listen to the band in general. You're feeling a little kinder and you think, okay, I can cut like a little slack here. But even going back to Uno, which is still not a very good record, being able to hear like, okay, this song and this song, I can pick those out. I can hear the value in those songs. Dose, which I think is the worst in the trilogy and second only to the aforementioned Father of All Motherfuckers, is the worst Green Day album. Still, even on that record, like, okay, this song and this song. Trey, the album we're talking about today, listening to this album, especially after Uno and Dose, it became very clear to me, and I think it's interesting because I've seen the exact same thing that you have when people talk about this trilogy. With every single album, there are people saying, well, this one's obviously the best, or this one's obviously the worst. It is so clear to me, and I don't know how anyone could say that Trey is not the best, let alone how anyone could think it's the worst. It easily has the most diversity within the songs. Not that it's this unbelievably diverse album, but there is easily more diverse instrumentation, more diverse subject matter within the songs. And what I mentioned earlier about just the listenability factor, I'm like, there are so many of these songs that are just highly listenable to me, even if they're not good. And I think there's some truly good songs on this record, but I even look at the first two songs. The first song, Brutal Love, which is basically Bring It On Home to Me. He's got his singing sounds great. There is, and Jason, maybe you can do a better job of describing this to people, because I'm not as technically versed, but there's a difference between your normal pitch correction or auto tune in the way that some artists use it, when like you can literally hear the notes being shifted as they sing to like try to cover up for what's not a very good vocal performance. And some people just use it stylistically, obviously the way that Kanye has used it, or Bon Iver. There's a difference between that and something like Melodyne, which I mentioned before, which is, it does pitch correct, but it's also in some ways it gives it like this weird sort of clean sheen effect. It almost makes, if it's used really wrongly, like it is on some points on this record, it almost gives the voice like a robotic nature. But I don't know if you can describe the difference between the two a little better.
I don't know. I mean, I know what you're talking about. I know exactly what you're hearing. The technical details of how each one works differently, I'm not entirely well versed on. But yeah, the vocal production on this record is really weird in spots, and it really, maybe it is that, but the EQ is weird. It could be that is coloring the EQ a lot as well. But yeah, the vocals sound strange at various points on this record.
I think they said, and I think the reason it bothers me is because I do think he's a very good singer. And on a song like Brutal Love, I think there's multiple points where you can tell he's singing excellently. And I think what bothers me about the Melodyne is like, you can tell when pitch correction is aiding somebody who just can't sing very well or didn't sing a very good take. and when it's just on there because it's on there. You can tell when someone has good natural tone. Billy Joe has a very good, smooth, natural tone. And like on that opening song, he's singing great. The band sounds great, even though it is just Bring It On Home to Me. But and lyrically, I think there's some really cool little, Drop Dead Hideous, Bad Sex, Buy Me a Train Wreck, Something for My Troubled Mind. He was going through some marital problems at this stage, and you hear that a lot in this record. I think him atoning for some possible affairs or thoughts or anything like that. And so for me, that's what it comes back to. I don't know if I would look at a song like Brutal Love and say, well, this is an amazing composition or it's a great song. But to me, and potentially colored by my bias as being a fan of the band, it's highly, highly listenable. And the same goes for the second track, Missing You, which is a pretty paint by numbers pop rock song, something that could have been on their Warning album or their Nimrod album, but it's not super lyrically offensive, solid melody. The production on it in terms of like, or at least the arrangement on it it's totally unfussy. You can separate the guitars from the bass and the drums. It all sounds totally fine. There's that factor to it, just to me, is so much more prevalent than it is on Uno and Dos, where granted the production's basically all the same, but there's so much less in terms of melodic strength, lyrical strength, or just anything interesting to latch onto.
Yeah, so I have a lot of notes about the production on this. It's the production on it
it's
is
strange.
Weird. It's weird. It's you can't say it's a bad sounding record, I don't think.
No.
It sounds pretty normal. It sounds like
it's unspectacular.
It sounds like a rock record from the time. It sounds big, but there's all these like individual elements that bother me on different tracks, and they change from track to track. The main like first guitar you hear on Brutal Love sounds terrible to me. It sounds like he plugged it right in and just like put no effect on it, and just that. So there's like all these like under massaged elements in all the songs. When the overall picture of the sound is good, there's like some bad acoustic guitar sounds on another track. The way the drums are mixed is really weird on some songs, where like the kick is really quiet and the snare is super loud.
Mm-hmm.
I think that in general the snare is way too loud on most Green Day stuff, but yeah, it's just weird. It's like, why it feels like pieces of the songs are maybe like being pulled from demos and they didn't recut them and they just built tracks around them. That's my inclination of what happened.
It is kind of, yeah. I know what you're saying. The guitar in Brutal Love, it doesn't bother me too much, but I also totally hear what you're saying. But then, when those background vocals come in, like those sort of Beach Boysy background vocals, like I think those sound totally fine. Then there's a song like Drama Queen, which, incorporates like some piano and some acoustic guitars. And like, it sounds like for at least a split second, whoever engineered this record remembered that like, oh, we can utilize space and like make it sound like you're in the room while this is happening. I think it sounds really good. And there's other tracks where I do think the guitar sounds as like crunchy and punchy as it should be. Like, I think the way the open chords sound at the beginning of Walk Away is really, really nice. And then, yeah, there's other times where it's like they just went into Pro Tools and opened up the 2012 Rock Band production pack and didn't adjust any of the EQ and said, all right, let's just go. And it's not that it's inconsistent necessarily, but it also is, because you can pinpoint the moments where it sounds like they worked on it and they tried and it's good, and then the other moments where they didn't try at all.
I think you can say that about the writing too. Like some songs feel way more written than others.
Yeah. So we're talking about this. I chose this album because I do like this album, so I don't want to initially be talking about so many of the negative things. But like I said, I think he, as a lyricist, Billy Joe does fall into that camp of when he's good, and when he's not, which, you and I, as big McCartney fans, we know what that's like, because sometimes you get, basically the entirety of the Chaos and Creation record, and then sometimes you get Darling, I love you very, 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 very much. Just tell me to press right there. That's it. Yes. Oklahoma was never like this. And you get that with
that song rolls though. That song's so good.
But it really doesn't. But another conversation for another time. With Billy Joe, it's the same thing. Billy Joe's, the one thing he consistently does that I don't like is that he pigeonholes like certain syllables into ways that like don't flow very well to me, that will bother me. But as a lyricist, his best lyrics are really great. On this record, there are hints of that, but then sometimes within a song you'll get excellent lyrics and then really not great lyrics. Like the song Walk Away, I think, is an excellent song. It's one of my favorite ones on the album. I really enjoy the first verse, this time I got to put my guard down, pick myself off the ground, and take the pain, because it'll pass. The swelling never really lasts, but the scars that remain remind me that I'm still living. That's totally fine. Then later in the song, we get, when you fall, you're gonna need a parachute or a used pair of shoes to go walk away. And it's like, you couldn't have taken another pass at that one. And yeah, basically the entirety of Dirty Rotten Bastards and 99 Revolutions are like, man, you really, 99 Revolutions is the ultimate phoning it in, like trying to reclaim something that we were recently doing sort of vibe. It bugs me so fucking much. And then yeah, Dirty Rotten Bastards, same thing. It's like, he's somehow trying way too hard and being extremely lazy at the same time lyrically. But I think songs like 8th Avenue Serenade Ex-Kid, Walk Away, Drama Queen, like I think those are all really intriguing. Sort of like Drama Queen gets, I think, a lot of pushback in the community because people think it's gross, or like they don't know what he's trying to say. Daddy's little drama queen, she's old enough to bleed now. But I think it's a pretty telling commentary on the way, obviously, that women have historically been viewed in a male-dominated society. You can look at the way that any female pop star has been viewed, when they're underage to when they come of age. I think that it sounds gross at first, but is that because they're gross lyrics, or because it's a gross mindset that has been driven into a lot of art and culture and society in general? I think it's really smart. 8th Avenue Serenade, again, like if Cheap Trick played that song, everyone would be like, this is a great song. Like, what a great melody, what great lyrics. I think the same thing about Ex-Kid. I think the same thing about Walk Away. I don't see how anyone could listen to the first two records in this trilogy and then listen to these songs and somehow think, oh, well, this isn't as good as those other bad records.
Well, my exposure to the first two is pretty limited, but from what I gathered quickly, I would say that you are right in that. I think that's the problem with being a punk band. You end up with these listeners that are not accustomed to more intelligent and well-written melodies, and they hear them and it's kind of like, what is this? This is kind of wimpy stuff, whatever.
Well, I think you're painting with some pretty broad strokes there. I mean, I understand what you're trying to say. If someone only listens to any style of music and expects everything to sound like that, it's going to be the same thing. I mean, you could say the same thing about metalheads, or like half of the people we know the older people we know who say there's been no good music since 1979. Yeah, I mean, if somebody only wants something to sound like Dookie or American Idiot, which American Idiot's a pretty diverse album, but or even like, yeah, I think there's a lot of validity to, US Chaos and the Cramps and Germs and the Misfits and those bands. They're not the most diverse bands ever, but there's beauty in something being what it is. I don't think it's fair to say that fans of those bands would be turned off by diversity, but I do get what you're saying in the sense of like, if someone only wants to hear that one thing, why hearing a solid melody or an acoustic guitar? I mean, fuck, when they put out Good Riddance, people were like, what are they doing? Like, how dare they? And there's a violin on it too. Crazy.
Yeah, that's my point. And I do say the same thing about metalheads.
Hey, you and Joe will have a talk later.
Yeah. No, obviously I'm not saying everybody is like that, but like there are segments of those audiences that are like
absolutely. That. Absolutely.
So favorite track, least favorite track?
I really have been digging 8th Avenue Serenade a lot recently. I mean, again, for me, not to keep harping on it, but just effortless melodic writing, as my imagination runs away on this 8th Avenue. Like it's not a super complicated melody, but the way he delivers it, obviously the relationship between, the harmonic structure of the chords and the melody really strong, the band behind it extremely strong. I think all the stops and starts, the arrangement of that song is perfectly unfussy. I think it shows that, hey, look, we are still the band that can do the thing we were doing before. We just, we're also trying to do it in the scope of something bigger, so it's going to get lost in it. I think X Kids, same thing. Fantastic lyrics, fantastic melodies. Walk Away, aside from the pair of shoes line, I think that's really strong. I really do like Drama Queen. Yeah, for me, the only thing about the least favorite song is Dirty Rotten Bastards. I think it's everything about it coming in. I just expounded on how I really appreciate the fact that he's never done the nasally vocal thing. And yet on that song, they come right in with the nah, nah, and I want to just hurt an innocent child when I hear it. I love a good multi-part song, and Green Day has shown that they can do great multi-part songs, but nothing about that song flows well. The lyrics don't flow well. The sections don't flow well together. I think it's pretty bad. I think the last three songs, that 99 Revolutions, and then The Forgotten, which sounds exactly like what it is, which is a song written for one of the Twilight movies. This completely overwrought piano ballad with the strings. It's called The Forgotten, and it's very forgettable. Hey-o, music journalism, nailed it. So any of those three, definitely Dirty Rotten Bastards. But even the songs that like, I look at a song like Amanda or a song like Sex, Drugs, and Violence. I don't think that those are great songs. I think they're pretty by the numbers. And I think when you listen to the album, because the production is so unspectacular, it can start to run together. And those songs in particular, by the time I get to Sex, Drugs, and Violence or Amanda, I'm like, okay, here's another one, mid to fast tempo song with a decent melody and just kind of goes by and doesn't leave any impact. But if you listen to them on their own, I think they're totally fine. They're nothing great. Oh, I also really liked A Little Boy Named Train, which on first listen for a lot of people would say like Drama Queen, like, what the fuck are these lyrics? I'm a little boy named Train. Ask me again, I'll tell you the same. But again, in the scope of the song itself, and I don't want to give too much credence to the theme of these three records because I think that it's kind of bullshit. But if you are looking at it as this is coming down after the party, a very reflective record, it's not hard. Like, it's not too much of a stretch to me to be like, all right, yeah, when I was a kid, like absolutely had these, either imaginary characters or things in my head or things that I sort of looked at and like, yeah, I bet when he was a kid, at some point he was like, my name is Train. And, when you're older and you have become hardened by the world around you and you're thinking about how much easier things used to be and you remember those sorts of things like, oh my God, I was so stupid and innocent back then. Looking at that song, I think it's as a song, melodically, instrumentally, everything else. Um, it's really, really well crafted, really well performed, and then lyrically, it ends up making a lot of sense to me. I don't think it's cringy at all, as I've seen some people say it is. So, um,
I'm just surprised
those,
that I'm a little surprised they didn't spell it Trey apostrophe N.
and therein lies the missed opportunities.
Right.
What about you though? What I want to hear you say something nice. There's got to be at least one song here where you're like, all right, props, guys. This one isn't too bad.
Yeah, there's a couple. Brutal Love, I thought was decent.
Mm-hmm.
Walk Away, I thought the chorus was pretty solid. They do kind of, after the first verse, I think pretty much sink into that Baba O'Reilly Teenage Wasteland rhythm. It's basically all
Yeah,
just kind of ripping that off, but it's decent. I thought Sex, Drugs, and Violence, I thought the lyrics were terrible, but I thought the hooks were decent on that one.
terrible lyrics, but yeah, 100% agree.
And Eighth Avenue Serenade, I thought pretty decent. I did there's that one section, I can't remember exactly how it goes. There's like this like ooh melody thing that's like a little vocal hook that's not really the
Mm-hmm.
chorus, but a little thing they do between the verses.
Oh, when they start vocalizing along with the da 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 da
Yeah,
da
yeah, yeah, yeah,
da
yeah.
da. Yeah, the oohs are maybe unnecessary.
I
I think
thought
it's
that
like a
was
great melody though.
I thought that was kind of annoying, but
It's fair.
as a song, I thought it was fine. Dirty Rotten Bastards is weird. It sounds like they're trying to do like a Celtic punk thing on that one, at least at the beginning. The weird thing is though, like in the midst of all these other songs that I felt were, some decent, some generic, a lot of just like kind of straightforward stuff, having that felt at least a little more interesting to me. But at the same time, if it was an album of all of that, I would hate it. So
It'd
it's
be the
like
worst album.
it's kind of like that they're in like a lose-lose situation with me, where if they're like trying to do big grand conceptual stuff, I don't like it. And if they don't do that, then it's too simple, too boring. So
Well, yeah, like I understand what you're saying, and I think what you just said again is a testimony to the greatness of American Idiot, which is that they do two of those songs. There's Jesus of Suburbia, and there's another song called Homecoming, which I think in is like just as good as American Idiot, where it's the multi-section song where they actually do flow together well. They are smartly composed, they're not annoying, and they're surrounded by more standard strong song structures. But unlike this album, where even the best songs aren't these, they're not amazing compositions, they're just solid pop rock songs. Like a song like Holiday or Give Me Novocaine or any of these songs like are actually, they're much more interesting. They're much more well crafted. They're not as paint by numbers. Certainly, the lyrics are much better. And in Dirty Rotten Bastards, for as much as I've talked about how I hate it, the lyrically, the part of the song I hate the most is in the middle of it when all of a sudden he introduces this character Juliana, where it's like, who the fuck is Juliana? You don't talk about her anywhere else on any parts of these three albums, nor in the beginning of the song, whatever. But that part of the song, like the energy is great. That Juliana homicide, dun, 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 like it's fine, but just at that point, it's like, why would I listen to Dirty Rotten Bastards just so I could hear that one part when I could go back to an album like Insomniac and listen to, the big hit is Brain Stew, which then segues into another song called Jaded, which is your classic, double time punk song. And it basically creates, in some ways, it's their first multi-section song. And it's 1,000 times better in every way. But yeah, in the context of this record, I understand what you're saying. It's something different. And that is also, I think, why I do like Brutal Love I don't know how much I think of Brutal Love really as a composition. I think the lyrics on it are good. It's just hard because it's literally Bring It On Home to me. But kicking off the album like that, knowing what else you're gonna get, he sings it well. The band plays it well. I hope. I don't know. What do you think of the Forgotten? Because every time I get to the Forgotten, I'm always just like, guys, what are you doing here?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know how terrible I think it was, but
I mean, he sings it well and he
I was like,
plays it well.
yeah,
It's
it's just
just
like it is what it is. We're ending on this ballad, and
so for you, what is there a nadir of this record? And if so, what is the nadir of this record for you?
yeah,
Or is it just an overall unspectacularness?
I think there's nothing that's like, oh my god, this is the worst thing I've ever heard. But I think Amanda is the most unspectacular of unspectacular. It is so generic, and I think
It is.
it's got nothing happening that's distinguishable from anything else on the record.
I also think, in addition to that, where it's placed on the out, and I'm looking at it, so it's sequenced in between actually two of my favorite songs. It's right in between A Little Boy Named Train and Walk Away. But in the context of the album, it's the ultimate example of like, as soon as it starts, I'm just like, all right, here we go. It just feels like it's 2 minutes and 28 seconds, and it arguably overstays its welcome. It could have just been taken off. So I mean, I've definitely in the past, I haven't done it. And I probably did it at some point last year. I would need to go back and look at it, but I've definitely made my if the trilogy was a single album, and like more than half of it is songs from this record, because I give this record probably a 3 out of 5 stars. And I wouldn't say that, like, again, I'm not going to go to bat for it as like, this is a very well made record. I know that people have different feelings on trying to argue music objectively versus subjectively. Objectively, like you kind of talked about the point of the series, I can look at this and say, yeah, this is not this great artistic statement or anything, or this amazing achievement, but it's very listenable to me. I do think that Eighth Avenue Serenade, Drama Queen, Ex Kid, A Little Boy Named Train, Walk Away, and maybe even Brutal Love, I think are good to very good songs, if not, reinventing the wheel or unspectacular by some means. Songs like Missing You, Sex, Drugs, and Violence, or even Amanda Out of Context, I'm like, these are fine. These are listenable. And so to me, that's why I wanted to talk about this album. I just don't understand how a Green Day fan, let alone a music fan in general, would listen to this and think and say this is 1.88 out of 5 stars. Like, unless you give it 1.88 out of 5 stars.
I rounded up to 2.
Hey, there we go.
Yeah, 2 stars for this, which to me is kind of poor, but not
Yeah,
the worst thing I ever heard.
yeah, and that's my only point, is that this is not, it's not the worst thing in their discography. It's definitely not the worst thing in this trilogy, and it's not the worst thing ever made. So I don't know why it gets the hate it does. Like you read some of the reviews. I don't think it's I don't think it's as bad as those reviews. And if anyone listens to Uno and Dos, and there are fine songs, there's maybe 5 or 6 songs across both of those records where I'm like, yeah, okay. This is so clearly superior. Just listen to Fuck Time off of Dos, and listen to Kill the DJ off of Uno, and Nightlife off of Dos. And those are reason enough why they are far worse than this album.
Don't you kind of think that in this kind of way of releasing records, that the third one is always bound to be the least well regarded?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's a reason I didn't listen to it when it came out, because I listened to Uno and thought, I'm good. And since then, going back to it, and they put out a record in 2016 called Revolution Radio, and then they put out Father of All in 2020. And there's exactly one song on their most recent record that I think is good, and the rest of it is pretty bad. And Revolution Radio, there's probably three or four. In general, you know, they reach such an apex, a cultural and musical apex with American Idiot, that I just don't know if Green Day is ever able to achieve a sort of late career renaissance in the way that we've seen so many of, these classic rock idols achieve them. And I don't really know who is really in line to do that next, because obviously we saw, Dylan and McCartney have theirs in the late 90s, and Springsteen in the early 2000s and whatnot. I don't know if that's ever going to happen for Green Day. I don't know how it's going to happen, because listening to this trilogy and the albums that came out after it, it's very clear to me that he still has the gift of great melodic writing. They're a great band. They're capable of producing great stuff, but how do you follow up something that was as huge as American Idiot and as great as American Idiot? And it's been 20 years since then now, so I guess we'll see what happens. But as from doing so many listographies, and you even said it in your most recent Kinks video, you get so used to hearing what is an artist's, last super critically acclaimed record, and then it does kind of fall off from there sometimes. And you'll find little hidden gems, whether that's a whole record or some songs. And luckily with the Kinks, you say going through, it's like, well, they never, just outright sucked at any point. With Green Day, I wouldn't say that fully as a band they've outright sucked. I think the trilogy was very misguided. It's not a good trilogy of records. But I don't think you can listen to every single song and say this is all garbage. I don't think you can listen to Revolution Radio and say this is all garbage. Yeah, I just don't know. I don't know what their time out of mind is going to be. I don't know what their The Rising is going to be, which your favorite Springsteen album, I know.
It'll happen when they hire T-Bone and make a Roots record. That'll be it.
Hey, listen, I understand the sentiment, but I know you're not going to talk shit about Raising Sand, because
I like Raising Sand.
Yeah, Raising Sand, for all of the artists that have misguidedly hired T-Bone because they think he'll give them the magic touch, or even all the artists that did the same thing with Rick Rubin, like, there's a reason they did it. And for me with T-Bone, it's Raising Sand. But yeah, I'm not looking forward to Billy Joe's T-Bone record. I would recommend, though, to you and to a lot of other people listening, Billy Joe and Norah Jones did a duet album. They remade Songs Our Daddy Taught Us, the Everly Brothers record. And it is surprising and unreal how well their voices blend together. And it's a really solid listen.
I think I heard some of that when it first came out. I'll have to go back and check it out.
I think you will begrudgingly like a decent amount of it.
I will definitely begrudging though.
Yeah. And I'll if anyone, you can't take the week off if you ever do the Green Day listography. You have to be there. If one of the other guys is lame and does, I will happily come on and do it with you. But I need all three of you to do it, because I just think that this band in general, I don't think that people view them the right way. I think that people just view them and value them as a pop punk band, where to me they are a rock band with punk rock, or if you want to call it pop punk sensibilities. So
Rick Rubin's never done a Green Day record, has he?
He hasn't.
That's surprising to me. That feels like
seems like it should happen. Yeah, it's all been most of it's Rob Cavallo, and then
Butch did 21st.
Yeah, Butch Vig did 21st Century Breakdown.
So Before we get out of here, your band, the Minks, have a record coming out. You want to plug that real quick?
Yes, Fiona and I would love to plug this record. I play in a band called the Minks, Minks, not Minx, and we are releasing a new album on March 3rd, 2023, 3/3/23, called Creatures of Culture. And we're recording this on January 26th. I don't know when it's going to come out, but just last week we uh, released the title track as the single from it with a music video, and very, very excited about it, and excited for you to listen to it and for everybody else to listen to it.
All right. Thanks for doing this. Everyone go check out the record. It might be out by now, maybe not, but make sure you pre-save it or whatever you got to do. Thanks again. A lot of fun. Thanks for being the guinea pig, the first one.
Thank you. I hope I did an okay job.
Thanks everyone for listening. You can find this on podcasting wherever you listen to your podcasts, all those places, and it will also be on the TLM channel, the video version, if you would like to watch it. So check it out. Hit the like, subscribe, all the stuff you do. See you in the next one.